Hi, hello, my name is Kira. I don't have an opening, let's get right into it. This is actually a re-recording of a script I did about a week ago. I was editing it, and you know what? All these negative videos started popping up on YouTube for me, just criticizing Helluva Boss and Hazbin Hotel and Vivian Madrano herself, and I just felt like going back and re-recording this, I guess. Yes, this is a critique of the writing of Helluva Boss, mostly because I think that there are things from Hazbin that could be carried over to Helluva Boss to make it a more successful show that would not be getting the ire that it has been accumulating. But I want to make I want to make things very clear. I come at this from like the writing standpoint. That is what I studied. It's what I have my degree in. It's the writing, it's the screenplay. It's that stuff. I don't have any right to talk about the voice acting or the art or any of that side of things. And also, I can recognize that I am never going to do what Vivian Madrano has done. I am never going to take a pilot from YouTube and turn it into a successful Amazon TV show. I am never going to make a YouTube indie series like Helluva Boss and have it be tremendously popular. That's something I'm never going to do. And so, when I critique something, it's with the full knowledge that Vivian Madrano is amazing and nothing I say is going to change that. But I did just want to talk about it a little bit because that's what I do. So, Helluva Boss Season 2, it's done and dusted, and a lot of people have given their opinions. I think they've been very strong opinions, strong negative opinions, but hey, you know what? What is the internet for if not bashing other people? Personally, I did not find Season 2 as good as Season 1, but I did want to actually give like a really nice coherent reason rather than just what I said at the last few minutes of my last reaction video. So I was thinking about Helluva Boss and I was thinking about Hazbin, and I think there is a really good comparison between Hazbin and Helluva Boss because Hazbin's greatest flaw might have actually helped Helluva Boss a lot. So Hazbin's greatest sin, as noted by me and many others, basically everyone, is that it was rushed. The story gets condensed into 8 little episodes, and then there's like the 6-month time period where we don't know what happened, and it's messy. It's a messy thing, and I think a lot of problems I have with the show stem just kind of systematically from the fact it was rushed. Like, I have problems with how Carmilla was utilized, and if the show had more time, they might have explained the whole angelic weapons thing a little better. Like, it just would have benefited from more time. But I still like it. I've still rewatched it through a couple of times. And there's some episodes I've watched like an embarrassing number of times. It's just a really easy rewatch. Now, one of the things that Helluva Boss struggles with, and this is something it has struggled with since conception, because even the show itself is representative of the problem, is Vivian Madrano's inability to kill her darlings. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because this fandom is very passionate about correcting me if I'm wrong, but Blitz and Moxie are based off characters from the Hazbin pilot who showed up briefly and might have been part of the story, but were ultimately kicked to Helluva Boss to explore Hell in a way that Hazbin Hotel just didn't have time to. Now, this is already an example of not killing your darlings. Instead of just disappearing, these two got their own YouTube spin-off. Do I think this was a bad decision? No, I don't. I don't hate the show either. I'm just critiquing it. I'm not bashing. I don't bother making videos about things that I hate. That's just a waste of my time. So, when saying Helluva Boss would have been better if it killed some darlings, this is, of course, referring to writers having to make some tough decisions and cutting scenes I really like, or maybe a relationship or even a character if they really just aren't going to work, but you gotta cut them even though they're your darling. You gotta kill them for the sake of the story. They gotta go, and Helluva Boss doesn't do that. And it is hard, it's like, as a writer myself, I'll be editing and I'll be like, oh, but I love this sentence. Oh, but it just doesn't fit. I mean, I'm like agonizing over a sentence. I can't imagine having to kill. Actually, no. I mean, I was complaining about like no agent picking up my book, and I was talking to someone who had read it, and they were like, "Well, you could cut this character," and my reaction was basically, "No, never." So it's like, cutting your darlings is never fun. Killing your darlings just it's the worst. But Hazbin, probably because of its limited runtime, had to condense just to fit the story that we ended up. And that gave us some good examples of killing darlings. Now, Alistair obviously existed in the pilot, but he is a great example of how Hazbin controlled itself, because Alistair, I believe, started off as like 3 different characters that got smushed into one, taking the most important traits and some design elements to make one character do the work of many. And he's a fan favorite character, super popular, and he's very effective and pretty iconic from the show. And yes, this did add to the rushed feeling, but the kill your darlings attitude also meant that storylines in Hazbin got wrapped up. We didn't get relationship drama that dragged on, and we got characters and their arcs, and maybe not everything is entirely resolved, but like there's things that are going to carry on to season 2, but nothing is really trailing, if that makes sense. Like, take Angel. We know the Valentino thing is not over, but we saw him get a story in episode 4 that had an ending, if not a complete resolution. If we look at Lucifer, obviously, he's got a lot going on. Lilith coming into play is going to affect him, but when it comes to his storyline of being estranged from Charlie, that gets wrapped up and we're ready to move on from it. Emotional beats like that just don't get kicked away to be dealt with later. They have to be dealt with in some form, even if it's not a complete resolution within the season, because things are just, they're too tight to leave dangling strings. So we know that Lilith is going to, be a thing. The V's are looking to take control. Alistair wants out of whatever contract he's in. There's these obvious storylines to follow into season 2, but we didn't get random darlings in the middle of nowhere who didn't get dealt with. Except, maybe with the exception of Emily, who will hopefully pick her storyline back up in season 2, promising Charlie that she was going to change things and then nothing changed, So maybe Emily was a darling that got introduced and just didn't get resolved really, but for the most part, they did a really good job. Things are just more streamlined. Heaven makes up its mind about the hotel, so everybody that gets introduced in Heaven, it's just like they make up their mind, that moves on. Rosie gets introduced and is a delight, but ultimately is just a way to move the story forward instead of introducing more plot lines. Get our cannibal army. It's streamlined. Lots of cool characters who doubtlessly have lore, but we didn't get into them because there wasn't time, and that's okay. Sometimes it's alright for the creator to have their own extensive character backgrounds, and for that character to just show up and look cool. Like Zestial. I'm sure he has a story. Did we need to learn about it? No, so we didn't. Has been rushed? Yes. Did it also focus on the important characters and get a coherent story across in the season? Yes, it did. Now, Helluva Boss didn't have the time restraints that Hazbin did because, it's indie and it's more controlled by Viv and the team. So, darlings that in Hazbin would have been pruned just for time constraints instead get to thrive because it's not fun to kill your darlings, like I said. So I don't think Viv really does when she isn't being forced to. We meet these characters and they just become bigger and bigger, and I can't tell anymore which of these characters were planned to be as big as they now are. I mean, Stolas is kind of the poster child for this. The pilot showed us an antagonistic character, and that got changed when Stolitz was suggested, so they tried to write Stolas as more sympathetic, and he ended up taking up a lot more screen time because of the Stolitz darling that will not die, because, well, Blitz is a main character, and it's always weird when a main character ends up with a not a main character. So to avoid that problem, Stolas had to leapfrog over a lot of other characters in order to take a main character place. So obviously with Stolas taking up more time, any plot lines that other characters might have had planned for them had to be altered or scrapped altogether. I think we can see in season 2 how a lot of characters suffered while Stolas and Stolitz were given a lot of attention. But Stolas is not the only darling. Fizz is my favorite character from the show. I want to set that straight. He is my favorite. I can't say I regret him being introduced, and I think Oops is a great episode. It's great for Blitz, and I can't say I can't say that I regret him being introduced, because he's so great, because Blitz starts to deal with that childhood trauma. But did we need Fizz to have the whole thing with Mehmet's magnificent musical mid-season finale? The mid-season finale is basically all Fizz, and while I love it because I love Fizz, if it had never occurred, I would not have felt like the show dropped Fizz's character arc, because he feels pretty wrapped up in regards to Blitz, and honestly, I didn't feel like the Fizz Ozzy romance was left on tenterhooks. Like, they made it pretty clear that they were going to continue being together, even if they couldn't be completely out about it. So I didn't feel a lot of tension there either. So while loving the episode and believing that Fizz 1 was one of the best handled characters in the season, I can't help but ask myself, what if they had taken that time and devoted it to, say, Millie? That's the thing about killing your darlings. Your darlings can overflow and completely wipe out the characters that you originally meant to focus on. Millie still has not had an episode focusing on her emotional journey. She has had larger roles in episodes where Moxie and Blitz were dealing with things, but we have not had a true Millie episode. And the fact that characters that were not necessary to the plot but were fun to play with have had that attention, the fact that Fizz got that attention and Millie is still drowning over here, it's just not good, Like, the show started off as a bunch of assassin imps. They sold us on IMP and their dynamic, and then sort of promptly dropped it in season 2. The only times we saw IMP all on a mission together, not being split up or sidetracked or just happening to be in the same area, was in the Antarctica short. Shooting Stars, we lost Eminem. Unhappy Campers, Blitz is after Barbie Wire. Sinsmiths, they don't actually do the job. Yes, IMP does stuff together while in hell, and they did that in season 1 as well, but do they really spend much time together? Yeah, there's X's and O's, but other than that, there's basically always someone missing, and whether it's Blitz buying sex stuff, or busy getting Luna a shot, or I guess they're all together for Mastermind, but that gets overshadowed by Stolas. So the company of imps that was pitched as the center of the show really stopped being the center of the show while other plot lines from Darlings took over. And it's not just characters and storylines. Small example, but it's a good one to go after. Take Luna's werewolf transformation. We have zero evidence that other hellhounds do this, and it came out of nowhere because probably someone had the idea that transformation would be cool in the fight. And, you know, it was the finale, so the fight should look cool, and so, yeah, okay, let's have a transformation. And it was an idea that just never got killed. You can try to justify it. You can try to find reasons why Luna has this extra thing. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think it really was just they wanted something to look cool for this finale fight. Let's just be realistic. Luna did not become infinitely more useful in her new form, besides being able to be ridden, which feels out of character for Luna to let Moxie ride around on her back without some sort of comment about how his weight was breaking her spine. But of course, we kind of did drop that dynamic between the two of them, didn't we? Well, if we contrast this with Hazbin, you know, if we look at Hazbin and we look at Charlie's transformation in the Hazbin finale, throughout the series, we have seen Charlie show evidence of her more demonic form through her horns appearing, her teeth lengthening, and generally looking more demonic. So when she does transform into Princess of Hell Charlie, it doesn't come out of nowhere and actually makes sense that these glimpses we've been seeing lead to an actual power-up. Otherwise, it's almost like, okay, so the Princess of Hell can make her horns appear for like 3 seconds? The Princess of Hell? Her having this more powerful form makes complete sense, and it makes sense that Charlie would be driven into it by anger towards Adam following Serpentius being blooped, because she's not an angry person, and it's anger that causes those glimpses of this form, including being angry with Adam in the very first episode. It's also not a transformation sequence for the hell of it. She's significantly better in a fight. She's able to do that powerful attack against Adam, and Lucifer taking on his demonic form is not a surprise because Charlie did it. So we just get to admire how cool they look rather than being surprised that Lucifer transformed, though Lucifer having that power also makes complete sense. So yeah, I really didn't like the Luna transformation because it makes no sense and also wastes time. Like, I mean, a way that they could have made it work for me is if, you know, they'd just shown Luna do this earlier, right? If they wanted Luna to have this kind of more werewolfy form, it would have actually made sense to introduce it earlier in the show. I mean, just have a point where Luna is feeling antagonistic, like when she's fighting kind of against B. If she had wanted to kind of transform into this, you know, werewolfy form, that would have made more sense for me, personally, for her to be kind of triggered into this. Or when she was at the vet and didn't want to get the shot, you know, to enter into this other form. And it also would have ended in an interesting conversation, of course, because this could have been a really nice way to introduce the idea that imps don't have human disguises, right? And this seems like a complete classist thing. And it could have been just completely could have been like a 15-second little talk about how Luna's, you know, kind of berating the imps for going to the human world and not having human disguises. And then Moxie, because he and Luna were pretty antagonistic at that point, of course, could point out that, you know, imps are not, you know, given human forms, blah, blah, blah. And then Millie, you know, as kind of is a good go-between Luna and Moxie most of the time, kind of, you know, just talking about how, you know, imps just don't have that kind of money, you know, or that kind of influence. God, I don't know what that accent was. But, you know, just really briefly getting into the idea that imps are just, they're so low on the chain of command that they don't even get something like a human disguise. And that could have, you know, played with their relationship, It could have played against the idea, kind of the classism of hell. It could have been just a very short conversation that got into why imps don't have human disguises, and Luna also kind of learning something about imps, kind of having already kind of assumed maybe that they had this and they just weren't using it. But no, it seems that imps just don't get human disguises. So I don't know. They could have had it introduced much earlier, and then if Luna had changed into a werewolf during the final fight, I would have been totally cool because the concept would have already been introduced. But it just feels like something that got introduced during that fight because it just sounded cool and they wanted something cool. So, yeah. I'm not a fan of the Luna transformation the way that they did it. Okay? I think that it could have been done differently and been done well, but the way that they did it, I just don't like it. I'm also not a fan of Octavia suddenly being stronger than Androlphus. Sure, Stolas says in Seeing Stars that he's not taught Octavia spells as complex as traversing the human realm, but that's also a spell that Luna can do, so that suggests that Octavia has not learned a lot, and we know that her dad is not exactly paying her a lot of attention these days. So for her to suddenly have the power to defeat Androlphus, I mean, I love a win for Octavia. I love a win for her. But that just felt like they needed Andy to go away, because there's no real reason for Octavia to have that power unless she was practicing on her own, which, again, we never saw. Please show, don't tell. And Androlphus himself, honestly, he feels like a darling anyway, because the idea of expanding the Goetias came from expanding Stolas' part in the story, where it would have been totally fine to not introduce all these new relatives. And yes, I know the Goetias are a thing in some depictions of hell, but so are priests hanging upside down with their feet in eternal fire. Just because it's in someone's hell doesn't mean we needed the Goetia family reunion, and Androlphus just feels really unnecessary when they could have made use of Stilla. Make the characters you have do the jobs that need doing. Don't come up with new characters, new darlings to, fall in love with their designs and their voice actors and all this stuff. Don't make the new ones. Just make use of what you have. The show has a lot of characters. But just talking about characters that you have, I think that's where Hazbin really wins and why Helluva Boss has all these darlings. Hazbin Hotel is not written by the same person for every episode. Viv directed all of them and she wrote some of the episodes, yes, but other writers took over for other episodes. And these characters came across as pretty consistent. Now, going on to Helluva, notice how Viv basically always writes the character-intensive episodes. You can kind of tell when the writing goes to Brandon or Adam Nalen, which I'm not saying is necessarily a bad thing. I'm not. But what kinds of episodes they tackle are pretty different. The characters will be different. The characters that they focus on, it happens in different amounts, I think, just according to how well the writer feels they can handle them. It's pretty clear which person is writing the episodes or which people. As soon as the sad one crops up, it's like it's Viv, and it's like, it's kind of like you can start to guess who is doing the writing before the credits roll. In Hazbin Hotel, different people write these characters and they stay consistent, and while there may be more focus on different characters in different episodes, I never watched an episode and felt that someone was wildly out of character, which I cannot say the same for Helluva Boss. This does, of course, mean that the Hazbin team just had really good writers, but I'm not saying that Viv, Brandon, and Adam Nalen are bad ones. It's simply easier to write characters who are more concrete. When every writer you have knows the characters well enough to be able to write their dialogue in a natural way that takes over from the writer of the last episode, when every writer knows the characters' motivations, what will make them angry, happy, confrontational, when they can follow emotional beats across episodes, that means that the characters are so well defined that the writers are able to know them so well that they can create a script that is faithful to those characters, even if they've never written them before. Hazbin has this smaller cast of concrete characters that a team of writers were able to handle. Helluva Boss, on the other hand, has an increasingly sprawling cast that I don't believe the writers always have a handle on the characters. That's why we see certain characters have some pretty radical shifts, and I don't know, but I think that may be why we see certain characters getting shafted. I don't believe that Viv can't write female characters. I love Charlie as a protagonist. Like, I adore her as a protagonist. And I appreciate that Viv wants to put Charlie and Vaggie as a priority moving forward. But because with Helluva, Viv tends to write the emotionally heavy episodes, and the characters who have been made emotionally heavy are Stolas and Blitz, with occasional appearances from darlings like Fizz. She simply hasn't been writing a lot of our shafted Queen Millie. You know? When/if Millie's pregnancy arc leads to some big emotions, then I think we'll see Viv writing her again. But I want to wait for that to judge whether Viv just gave up on her Helluva women, because I think that she can write women just fine. She just hasn't been handling the episodes that have had a lot of Millie in them. That's it. But the problem remains that I don't think the Helluva characters are concrete enough for all the writers, which allows for some strange characterizations or actions that don't seem quite right. Because it is marketed as comedy, a lot of these can be waved away as a joke, just gone bad. But if we look at Stryker, for instance, he went from being a very intimidating and a charismatic villain who had Blitz in the palm of his hand within 5 minutes to a competent assassin who nevertheless needed to hand make a statue of himself with a big penis, which honestly feels like a Chaz joke that they just didn't fit into X and O, so they just slapped it onto this one. And he gets flustered by Stolas rattling him up about working for a blue blood, which feels like something that an intelligent guy like Stryker would have thought about before this point. And, he was also really unflappable before, and now it's like, ooh, no, Stolas is getting sassy. Oh, no, that's Stryker's only weakness. Oh, boy. And yeah, it just feels like something that he would have thought about before that point. And then he gets reduced to being Crimson's guy, who gets fooled by Fizz singing for everyone to look at him. I mean, I know that he was the one who was trying to look around and pay attention the most to what Blitz was doing, but he was also ultimately fooled by Fizz singing that "Look at Me" song. Look at this song. And then, there's the explosion, and he retreats from the fight like a wounded possum, because his clothes catch on fire and he no longer cares about finishing the job. I mean, just what happened to that guy who was so dangerous and cool? Like, oh boy. And then he just appears in front of the Satanly court itself to lie and say that Blitz hired him. Blitz the assassin hired him to assassinate someone. Is that not only pathetic, but it's also a complete turn on his eat the rich mentality and general, assassins keeping a low profile sort of thing? Like, if he's willing to reveal his face as an assassin, making him way less of an effective assassin just to get Blitz killed, like, why didn't he just stop, drop, and roll and try to kill Blitz while the poor guy was preoccupied with trying to save Fizz? Just anyway, I have no respect for Stryker as a character anymore, which is a shame because I thought his introduction meant the show was going in a cool, kind of dark way, and now he's just a joke to me. And I think part of the problem was that he was not a concrete character, that every writer could have a very solid idea of what to do with him. And it's not just side characters like Stryker. Like, what the hell has Moxie been this season? Just, no, don't answer that. I mean, pick which personality you want to go with. Final point is that the team of writers could make the episodes for Hazbin very tight in terms of characterization. I think that was because they all knew the characters well enough to be able to pass the torch with minimal problems. If characters are less stable in the writers' minds, like I think they might be with Helluva Boss, there's going to be more character assassination, except it's not so much assassination as just a writer not knowing who they're really writing. And this can easily happen when a show is not able to kill its darlings and decide who should be focused upon. You end up with a lot of characters, and often those characters just grow because, they're darlings, they're fun. Like Fizz, like Verostica, like Stolas, like Octavia because she's linked to Stolas. Like the whole Goetia clan, all these characters who take up more and more time that could have been reallocated to the main cast. And all of the confrontations that happen with these characters and other, they could have found a way to make it the main cast. Like everything could have been rewritten so that it was about IMP. It's just, they're good writers. They are good writers. They could have made it happen. It's just, when you consider how much time got given to these characters who could have stayed fairly simple, not really fleshed out, when that time could have been devoted to IMP, the characters we thought we were going to focus on, that the show really sold us on, like, hey, here's our show, it's about IMP, and just, They could have focused so much more on IMP and made each of those characters just more solid, more difficult to get wrong because their motives and personalities and fears, etc., are just made clear throughout the course of the show. So there wouldn't be these weird episodes where Moxie is just, not Moxie. And I'm not even talking about unhappy campers necessarily. Like, the way he seesaws from capable assassin who is their resident weapons expert to a guy who gets overwhelmed by math. I mean, both things can be true of a person. Like, it is possible to murder a person and not like math. But his personality shifts from being much more confident to crying about finances from episode to episode. And I think the idea is that Moxie's a bit of a nerd no matter what he's doing, but the way he backslides into being a pathetic little mess who kills people for a living and wanted to show his dad, how tough he's gotten over the years but can't deal with numbers and results to the fetal position is just, it's placed for laughs. I get that it's a gag, but I'm not really laughing. IMP has great synergy, a great dynamic. Once the imps, they play off each other really well. Add Luna, and she also fits in well. Blitz has chemistry with any one member of IMP, and that's super important. And the show told me to fall in love with this little found family, and then sort of left it for dead because there were other characters and other plot lines that needed to happen. So the dynamic the show wanted us to fall in love with was fallen out of love by the writers themselves so other things could take their place. Darlings that would have been better off dead because they harmed the show by shaking the foundations. Basically, I think Helluva Boss would have been better given time constraints on their runtime the same way Hazbin was. It would have forced them to give up some plot lines, some characters, some relationships that might have been fun but didn't end up contributing to the base premise of the show. And when you don't have time to chase after a character being written badly, you're going to be very purposeful about everything you do with them. Like, if the Helluva team knew Stryker was going to be their bad guy because they didn't have time to introduce the Goetias, then I think they would have tried to keep him much more intimidating, because there couldn't be jokes made at the expense of his scary factor when they needed him to remain scary. imagine if Hazbin had made jokes at Alistair's expense, like him making a statue with a large penis. It's pretty unthinkable, right? Because the slight laugh it might gain is not worth the way it would belittle his character. And while Stryker is not Alistair, obviously, he still could have been used as a frightening antagonist who worked alongside Stella, perhaps even with a plan of offing her and Octavia after getting the money for killing Stolas. There were opportunities there. But yeah, where Hazbin was very careful with its characters and very purposeful with the plot, even if it came out rushed, I think I prefer that, knowing what Helluva Boss became without those constraints. The characters and the episodes all contributed to the plot, or to the themes, or to setting up future conflict, and that just can't be said of Helluva Boss. Like, if Stolas' thing is going to be mourning his relationship with Octavia, and Eminem will have the pregnancy storyline, I don't know what's going to happen with Luna. Blitz seems pretty happy, so is his upcoming storyline still going to revolve around Stolas or what? Like, not knowing the trajectory of the main character at the end of the season is really rough. Just compared to Hazbin, where we know that Heaven has just learned redemption is possible, and Lilith has been told to go deal with Charlie. The hotel has been rebuilt and is going to presumably attract more demons, so that occupies Charlie, Lucifer, Emily, Veggie because of her connection to Heaven. Angel Dust has his continuing storyline with Valentino. Husk wants out of the contract with Alistair. Alistair wants out of his contract. The V's are planning to take over with the Overlord losing influence. Like, outside of Nifty, who never really had a storyline, I can guess where all the main cast are headed. And that's good. It means no one is directionless. And we also know that Charlie's goal is always going to be to try to help her people. Whether that means sending them to heaven or not, we'll find out, but it's a premise the show stuck with all season, and all signs point to it still being the main focus of season 2. Helluva Boss started with this idea of IMP, but lost the thread, and I feel like unless there are some major changes, season 3 is going to be even more all over the place, since they can't stop inventing new darlings and can't push any of the old ones aside. It lacks direction at this point, and a show at the end of its second season should have at least some major pointers as to where it's going. But yeah, in the end, I think I might just shut up about Hazbin being rushed, because if it had ended up being produced independently, we might have had the same problems as Helluva Boss now has, and that would be a huge shame to lose time with the characters we've grown to love, or at least appreciate, because Viv can't seem to stop herself from introducing new characters and plotlines when she doesn't have a time crunch to work with. And I get the desire to introduce your characters and your world, and I get that you don't want to kill your darlings. It's not fun. But you have to know when the limit has been reached. And for a show that began because Hazbin could not accommodate all that Viv wanted to explore in Hell, as a show that basically began as a darling that could not be killed, it's not surprising that an overflow of undead darlings is leading to some serious conversations about a decline in quality. But again, you know, I'm just looking at this from the story perspective, screenwriting story perspective, and like I said earlier, I'm never gonna create a indie animation that gets put on YouTube and is insanely popular. So, you know, as much as I can realistically criticize Helluva Boss, it's still something that I think that no matter what, the writers, the team, Vivian Madrano should, you know, be proud of. And I hope to see a little less of the hate that I've just really been noticing. So, while I do think that Helluva Boss could learn from Hazbin Hotel when it comes to really trimming your storyline, learning who your characters are, and really having all your writers with a very firm idea of who those characters are to prevent darlings who are just fun from taking over the show, from really vaulting over characters who were meant to be main characters. There's a lot of, I wish I could have known how this would have turned out if it was the other way around. There's a lot of that. But, like I said, in the end, I'm never gonna make it. So this is just my personal critique. You don't have to agree with it. I do hope that season 3 picks itself up and is awesome. So this is probably the last video I'll make about Helluva Boss for a long time. So I hope that you are all doing well wherever and whenever you are, and maybe I'll see you later. If you feel like dropping a like or even subscribing, this is a small channel, still growing. It all helps out a lot. I'll see you later. Bye.